Marco pressed the barrel against the receptionist's temple and pulled the trigger. The click of an empty chamber was the only reason she was still breathing. "Next one isn't empty," he said without blinking. Then he grabbed her by the hair, threw her across the desk like she weighed nothing, and turned to face the entire emergency room. "Where is he?" 3 men moved in behind him, weapons up, locking every exit with military precision. Screams, chaos, blood pressure monitors still beeping like the world wasn't ending. Nobody in that room stood a chance. Nobody, except the woman in scrubs who had already stopped being a nurse. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. The night started the way most Tuesday nights started at Memphis Regional Medical Center. Loud, exhausted, and completely without mercy. By 9 o'clock, the ER had already processed 14 patients. 2 car accidents, 1 diabetic crisis, a teenager with a broken wrist from a skateboarding fall his mother swore she had warned him about, and a man in his 60s who had been trying to move his refrigerator alone and had paid dearly for that ambition. The waiting room was a living, breathing ecosystem of pain and impatience, of people checking their phones every 30 seconds as if the clock might move faster if they stared at it hard enough. Gianna Ritchie moved through all of it the way water moves through rock, steady, patient, finding every crack and passage without ever losing direction. She was 38 years old, medium height, with a calm that most people mistook for detachment. Her colleagues called it her flatline face, the expression she wore when everything around her was on fire, and she was the only one not sweating. Charge nurse Kesha Williams, who had worked alongside Gianna for going on 4 years now, once told a new resident that Gianna Ritchie was the most unreadable human being she had ever met. "And I grew up playing poker with my grandmother," Kesha had added, which said everything. Gianna had transferred to Memphis Regional about 3 years ago from a hospital in Pensacola, Florida. Before that, her file was thin in the ways that certain files are always thin when someone has worked in places where the government prefers not to leave a paper trail. Nobody on the night shift knew much about her past. They knew she was good at her job. They knew she never flinched. They knew that when a situation went sideways, when a patient coded unexpectedly, when a family member became violent in the waiting room, when a trauma came in that would have shattered a less experienced person, Gianna was always the one standing calmest at the center of it. They did not know why. Not yet. At 10:47 p.m., the ambulance bay doors burst open, and the paramedics rushed in a gurney that was moving fast enough to scatter charts off the nurse's station counter. GSW to the left shoulder. Through and through, he's lost significant blood. BP is dropping, 80/50 and falling. Gianna was already moving. She fell into step beside the gurney without breaking rhythm, her hands going to the wound packing, while her eyes did a full inventory of the man on the stretcher. He was black, somewhere in his late 30s, built like a man who had spent time doing hard physical work, not gym work, real work. His shirt had been cut open by the paramedics, and his chest was rising and falling in shallow, rapid waves. His left side was soaked dark. But what Gianna noticed first, before she noticed the wound, before she noticed the vitals readout on the paramedic's monitor, was his eyes. He was conscious, and he was terrified. Not the ordinary terror of a man who had been shot, something deeper, something specific. "Trauma 2, Gianna called out, steering the gurney with one hand while she pressed firm against the wound with the other. "Get me Dr. Okafor, now, and somebody call blood bank." They wheeled him into Trauma Bay 2, and the controlled chaos of emergency medicine erupted around him. Nurses cutting away clothing, techs attaching monitors, the sharp percussion of equipment being opened and activated. Gianna stood at his right side and leaned down close to his face. "Sir, can you hear me? I need your name." His lips moved, dry. She could see him trying to pull his voice up from somewhere that felt very far away. "Darnell," he managed. "Darnell Watkins." "Okay, Darnell. You're at Memphis Regional. You're going to be okay. Can you tell me what happened?" His hand came up and grabbed her wrist. Not aggressive, desperate. His grip was surprisingly strong for a man losing blood at the rate he was losing it. His eyes locked onto hers, and what she saw in them made something shift in her chest. "They're coming," he said. She kept her voice level. "Who is coming, Darnell?" "The men who did this." He swallowed hard. His eyes cut toward the door and then back to her face. "They don't leave witnesses. You understand what I'm saying to you? They do not leave witnesses." Gianna held his gaze for a long moment. Around her, the room buzzed and beeped and moved at full speed. She was aware of all of it and none of it. "How many?" His eyes widened slightly. Most people, when they told someone that killers were coming for them, did not get back the question, "How many?" They got back, "Sir, you need to calm down," or "We're going to get you some pain medication," or a long, uncomfortable silence while the person in front of them decided whether to believe them or flag the chart for psychiatric evaluation. Gianna asked how many the way a person asks it when they are already running numbers. "4, Darnell said. "Maybe more. Marco runs a 4-man team, ex-military. They're contractors, private. The man I work for sent them." He stopped, coughed, and the effort of it crossed his face like a wave of agony. "I was supposed to be dead in that alley. I wasn't supposed to make it to a hospital." "But you did," Gianna said. "Yeah." His grip on her wrist tightened slightly. "And now everybody in this building is in danger because of me." Dr. Victor Okafor swept through the door at that moment, already gloved, already reading the situation with the rapid-fire clinical eye of a man who had been doing trauma surgery for 22 years. "What do we have?" "GSW, left shoulder, through and through, BP 80/50, pulse 110. He's going to need a chest x-ray to rule out pneumothorax." Gianna rattled off the medical details without breaking contact with Darnell's eyes. She was still looking at him. He was still looking at her. "Understood. Step back. We've got him from here." Gianna released Darnell's wrist. She straightened up. For one moment, she stood very still in the center of the busy trauma bay. And if anyone had been watching her face closely enough, which no one was, because everyone was doing their jobs, they might have seen something pass across it. Not fear, not exactly. Something more like recognition. The kind of look a person gets when a situation they have been theoretically prepared for their entire professional life suddenly becomes very, very real. She walked out of Trauma Bay 2 and directly to the nurse's station. Kesha was there, updating a chart, her reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. She looked up when Gianna approached. Something in the way Gianna moved, that slight difference in her walk, that subtle recalibration of posture that Kesha had never been able to name but always noticed, made Kesha set her pen down without being asked. "What?" Kesha said. "I need you to listen to me carefully," Gianna said. Her voice was low, completely even. "And I need you to not ask questions until I'm done." Kesha pulled her glasses off. "Gianna, what is happening?" "The patient in Trauma 2, Darnell Watkins. He says a 4-man armed team is coming to this hospital tonight to finish what they started. Contractors, trained." His words. The color changed in Kesha's face. It didn't drain, it shifted. "You believe him?" It wasn't a question. Kesha had known Gianna long enough to understand that the fact that Gianna was telling her this at all meant Gianna had already made her assessment. "Yes," Gianna said simply. "I believe him." "Then we call the police." "I'm going to call the police. I'm going to call them right now. But Kesha, I need you to understand something." Gianna's eyes were steady and serious and carrying something behind them that Kesha had never quite seen before. "If these men get here before the police do, I need you to trust me. Whatever I ask you to do, whatever it looks like from the outside, I need you to trust me and do it without hesitation. Can you do that? Kesha stared at her. The ER hummed around them. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor was beeping its steady patient rhythm. A child in the waiting room was crying softly, the ordinary music of a night shift. You're scaring me, Kesha said. Good, Gianna replied. That means you're paying attention. She picked up the desk phone, moved the ambulatory patients from the east waiting area to the family consultation room. Tell them it's routine, a plumbing issue, whatever you need to say. Start quiet. Don't create panic. Gianna, now Kesha, please. Kesha stood up from her chair, looked at Gianna for one more long second, and then turned and started moving down the hall. She didn't ask another question. In 4 years of working together, she had learned to read the temperature of Gianna Ritchie's certainty, and right now that temperature was absolute zero, which, paradoxically, meant the situation was burning. Gianna called 911. She spoke to the dispatcher with clinical precision, giving the address, the nature of the threat, the number of potential assailants, and the fact that they were believed to be armed and professionally trained. The dispatcher, to her credit, took it seriously. Units were being dispatched. ETA was estimated at 12 to 15 minutes. Gianna hung up and looked at the clock on the wall. 10:59 p.m. 12 to 15 minutes. In 12 to 15 minutes, the police would arrive. The question was whether the 4 men Darnell had described would arrive before or after that window closed. She already knew the answer. She could feel it the way she had once learned to feel a tide turning in open water. The subtle shift in pressure before the wave arrives, before you can see it, before anyone else on the boat has any idea that something is coming. She walked to the supply closet at the end of the hall. She opened it with her key card. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the shelves of sterile packs and medical equipment, and she thought about the 12 years she had spent before this, before Memphis, before nursing, before the version of herself that wore scrubs and took blood pressure readings and remembered patients' names and made sure the overnight staff always had coffee. She thought about the water, about the Gulf, about the way a darkened boat looks different from a darkened boat when you know what to look for. She thought about a man named Marco who ran a 4-man team and had been sent here tonight to make sure Darnell Watkins never left this building alive. She pulled 2 items from the supply cart, tucked them into her scrub pocket, and closed the closet behind her. Back at the nurses' station, she checked in on Trauma Bay 2 through the window. Darnell was being stabilized. His vitals were still poor, but moving in the right direction. Dr. Okafor was focused and efficient and utterly unaware of what was coming. Gianna made a decision. She pushed through the door. Dr. Okafor, I need 30 seconds. Okafor looked up with the expression of a surgeon who has been interrupted in the middle of something important, which he had been. Richie, I'm a little busy. 30 seconds, she repeated. No apology in it, just the fact. He looked at her face. He gave her the 30 seconds. There is a credible threat against this patient, she said, keeping her voice low enough that only he could hear. Armed men are coming to this facility tonight. Police have been called and are en route, but I need you to be prepared to move this patient if I give the word. Down to radiology, lower level, away from the main ER floor. Dr. Okafor was 51 years old. He had done his residency at Grady Memorial in Atlanta, which was a way of saying he had seen more trauma in 4 years than most surgeons see in a career. He was not a man who startled easily, but something moved through his eyes now that was not quite a flinch, more like the rapid internal calculation of a man reordering his priorities. You're serious, he said. As a code blue, she said. He nodded once. Tell me when. She left the trauma bay. In the hallway, she passed a young patient care tech named Marcus, 22 years old, 6 months on the job, who looked at her as she passed and said, Hey, Nurse Ritchie, you okay? You look, I don't know, different. She paused. She looked at him, this young man with his whole career ahead of him, standing in this hallway with a stack of linen he was about to deliver. Marcus, she said, do you remember the lockdown drill we ran back in March? He blinked. Yeah? I need you to review those procedures in your head. Right now, while you're walking, can you do that for me? He looked confused. He nodded. Sure, but is everything okay? Just review them, she said, and kept walking. 11:15 p.m. In the waiting room, Kesha had managed to quietly relocate 8 ambulatory patients to the family consultation room. She had told them there was a maintenance issue being resolved. Most of them had believed her because people generally believe confident authority figures in medical settings. One older gentleman had pushed back slightly. What kind of maintenance issue? And Kesha had looked him straight in the eye and said, the kind where you really want to be in a different room, which had been enough. Gianna did a slow, systematic walk of the ER floor. She wasn't rushing, she was mapping. Every exit, every entry point, every room, the position of every staff member currently on the floor, the location of the crash carts, the placement of the overhead light switches, both the manual panel near the nurse's station and the breaker room adjacent to the supply corridor. The distance from the ambulance bay doors to trauma bay 2. The distance from the main entrance to the security desk where Larry, the overnight security guard, was currently watching a basketball game on his phone. Larry was a good man and a dedicated employee. He was also 63 years old, 30 pounds over his ideal fighting weight, and armed with a radio and a taser. He was not, by any measure, equipped for what was coming. Gianna stopped at the security desk. Larry. He looked up, slightly guilty about the phone. Nurse Ritchie, what can I do for you? I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it without arguing. His face went from guilty to focused. People responded to Gianna's tone that way. Okay, I need you to go to the back office, lock the door, and call your supervisor. Tell them we may have a security situation and you need backup authorization to engage emergency lockdown protocol. Larry sat up straighter. What kind of situation? The kind where you make that call from behind a locked door, she said. Go. Now. To his credit, Larry went. 11:42 p.m. Gianna was standing at the central nurses' station, which gave her a direct sight line to the main entrance doors, when her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. 4 words. You should have run. She stared at the message for exactly 2 seconds. Then she set her phone face down on the counter. She had been right. They were close. They had eyes on the building somehow. A camera, a contact inside, a scout who had been watching since the ambulance brought Darnell in. It didn't matter which. What mattered was the timeline had just compressed. She looked across the nurse's station to where Kesha had just returned, breathless and tight-faced from managing the patient relocation. Kesha, she said. Kesha looked at her. When I tell you to kill the lights, you kill the lights. Main panel, right there. Everything except the emergency exit signs. You hit that switch and you get behind the nurse's station desk, and you do not move until I tell you. Understood? Kesha's face had gone the particular shade of pale that comes when adrenaline meets genuine dread. But her jaw was set. Her eyes were clear. 4 years of trusting this woman's instincts. It had to count for something. It had to count for everything. Understood, Kesha said. Good. Gianna checked the clock on the wall. 11:54 p.m. And then the front doors opened. Marco came in first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket that hung low on both sides. The specific way a jacket hangs when it is carrying something heavy. His face was composed. That was the thing Gianna noticed first. Not his size, not his hands, not the way his eyes immediately swept the room in a practiced, methodical arc. The composition of his face. The total absence of any emotion that wasn't purpose. She had seen that face before. She had worked alongside people who wore it. She had, at certain points in her life, worn it herself. The 3 men with him moved with the quiet, coordinated efficiency of a team that had done this before. One broke left toward the ambulance bay. One moved to the far end of the waiting room. The third, the youngest-looking one, wiry, dark-haired, went directly for the main exit doors and turned the internal lock with a key. A key. They had a key to the building. Marco walked to the center of the waiting area and stopped. "Nobody needs to get hurt tonight," he said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. His voice was calm and measured, and utterly devoid of anything resembling reassurance despite the words. "We're here for one person. Give us that person and we walk out. Everybody else goes home." At the nurse's station, Gianna stood very still. She was watching Marco. She was watching the spacing of his team. She was counting steps, running geometry, reading the room the way she had been trained to read a hostile environment, not with fear, but with the same cold clarity that makes a surgeon's hands steady during the cut that will either save or lose the patient. Across the station, Kesha's hand had found the light panel. Her fingers were resting on the switch, waiting. Marco's eyes swept the floor. They landed on the nurse's station. They landed on Gianna, and something crossed his face. Just for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something that wasn't quite recognition, but was adjacent to it. The way a trained person sometimes senses another trained person. The indefinable but unmistakable presence of someone who is not afraid when they should be. His head tilted slightly. "Where's the patient?" "Gunshot wound. Came in about an hour ago. Give him to us and this is over in 30 seconds. Gianna looked at him. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was the face Kesha called flatline. "I don't know who you're talking about," she said. Marco almost smiled. It was worse than if he had. "Lady, I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds to reconsider that answer." Gianna looked at him for one long, quiet moment. Then she looked at Kesha, and she gave the smallest nod. Kesha's hand came down on the switch. The ER went black. The darkness that swallowed Memphis Regional Medical Center at 11:54 p.m. was not the soft, forgiving darkness of a power outage. It was total, immediate, the kind of darkness that has weight to it, that presses against your eyes like a hand against a wound. 1 second, the fluorescent lights were buzzing their indifferent white hum across every surface, and the next second, there was nothing. Not a flicker, not a fade, just gone. For exactly 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then Marco's voice came out of the black, and it was no longer calm. "Lights, get the lights back on, now." 11:54 p.m. and 30 seconds. The man near the ambulance bay, Tomas, 29 years old, former Army Ranger, the one Marco trusted most with close quarters work, reached for the tactical flashlight on his belt. His thumb found the switch. The beam cut a hard white line through the darkness, swinging left, swinging right, catching the frozen faces of 2 nurses who had pressed themselves against the far wall like the wall might absorb them. "Don't move," Tomas said to the nurses. His voice was professional, flat. He had said those exact words in exactly that tone in 3 other countries before Memphis, Tennessee. But in the split second that his flashlight swung right, something moved to his left. He didn't hear it. He didn't see it. He felt it. The displacement of air, a fraction of a second of warning that his training registered and his body tried to respond to. Tried. His hand was already bringing the flashlight back around when something connected with his wrist at an angle that sent the flashlight spinning across the floor in a long, rolling arc. The beam tumbled across ceiling and floor and wall like a lighthouse gone wrong, strobing the darkness with wild, useless light, and Tomas opened his mouth to call out. One sharp impact. His throat, then his temple. The flashlight came to rest against a supply cart, its beam pointed at the wall, uselessly illuminating a hand sanitizer dispenser and nothing else. Tomas did not get back up. 11:55 p.m. Marco heard the flashlight hit the floor. He heard it stop rolling. He did not hear Tomas make another sound. And that silence, That specific silence told him something had gone very wrong in the first 90 seconds of the operation. In 15 years of contracted work across 4 continents, Marco had never lost a man in the first 90 seconds. "Tomas," he said low and sharp. "Report." Nothing. "Javier, get on the east side. Rodriguez, stay on those doors." His voice had dropped to the clipped, minimal language of a man in the field. Every word a command, every syllable a resource not to be wasted. He was moving as he spoke, pulling his own weapon, his hand going to the NVG unit clipped to his jacket collar. Night vision. He hadn't planned on needing it. He had planned on being in and out in under 4 minutes. One target, clean and fast, no complications. Somebody in this building had planned on him needing it. That thought landed in Marco's chest like something cold and specific. He clicked the NVG monocle into place over his right eye. The world turned green and gray and suddenly visible. He swept the room. He saw the 2 nurses against the wall. He saw Rodriguez holding position at the front doors, weapon up. He saw Javier moving along the east corridor, flashlight out now. Smart, Marco thought. Don't advertise your position. He could see the overturned chairs in the waiting area, the scattered magazines on the floor, the front desk with its computer screens still faintly glowing. He did not see Gianna. 11:55 p.m. and 40 seconds. Gianna was behind the medication cart at the end of the central corridor, and she was not breathing loudly. She had Tomas's radio in her left hand and his flashlight, which she had retrieved from the floor in the dark with the efficiency of someone who had trained in conditions where light was a liability, in her right. She had not turned the flashlight on. She did not plan to. She was thinking. Fast. Sequential. The way she had been trained to think when the variables were shifting faster than any plan could accommodate. 4 men. That meant someone had told him it was a possibility, which meant someone had anticipated her move, which meant... She stopped that line of thought before it could slow her down. Later. Think about that later. Right now, 3 men with weapons in a building full of patients and staff. Javier was in the east corridor, moving toward Trauma Bay 2. Rodriguez was on the doors. Marco was in the center, which meant he was the control point, the one the other 2 were orienting around. You don't take down the perimeter first. You take down the center. She moved. 11:56 p.m. Kesha was behind the nurse's station desk, on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest and her back against the cabinet. She was holding her phone. She had already sent an emergency text to every staff member on the floor. Lockdown. Hide. Do not use lights. Do not make noise. Do not come to nurse's station. She had sent it 30 seconds after hitting that light switch, and she had no way of knowing how many people had received it before the chaos started. She was praying. She was also watching the small green glow of the emergency exit signs above the doors and trying to count shadows, which was not a skill she had ever expected to need in this profession. She heard something, down the corridor, a sound that was part struggle and part impact and entirely brief, almost surgical in its economy. Then silence again. She pressed her back harder against the cabinet. Her phone buzzed. A text from Gianna's number. 1 word. Javier. Kesha stared at the screen. She had no idea what that meant. She realized she didn't need to. Gianna was telling her the east corridor was clear. She put the phone in her pocket and breathed. 11:56 p.m. and 50 seconds. Down in Trauma Bay 2, Dr. Okafor had heard the lights go out and had immediately remembered what Gianna had told him 40 minutes ago. He had a pen light, every physician carried one, and he was using it now, keeping the beam low and narrow, focused on his patient. Darnell Watkins was looking at the ceiling. His vitals had stabilized. The bleed was controlled. He was still in serious condition, but he was no longer in immediate danger of dying from the wound. The danger he was in now was a different category entirely. "Doctor," Darnell's voice was strained. "The lights went out." "I noticed." She did that. Okafor looked up from the IV line he was checking. Who did what? The nurse. Darnell's eyes moved to the door. She went dark. That means it's happening. He tried to sit up, and Okafor's hand went to his shoulder immediately. You are not sitting up. Doctor, I need you to understand. I understand perfectly, Okafor said, with a firmness that surprised even himself. I was told to be ready to move you. We are not moving yet. You are going to lie still and let me do my job and trust that the person who told me to be ready for this knows what she is doing. Darnell looked at him for a long moment. You trust her? Okafor considered the question with genuine seriousness. He thought about 3 years of watching Gianna Ricci work. He thought about the way she moved, the way she knew things before they happened, the way she had walked into this room 40 minutes ago and delivered a threat assessment with the calm of someone reading a weather report. More than I've trusted most people in this building, he said, including myself on occasion. Darnell was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she's going to need to know something. Tell me, I'll make sure she gets it. Rodriguez, the one on the doors, he's not just security, he's the inside man. He's been in this hospital before. He knows the layout because somebody gave it to him. Darnell paused, something passing across his face that was part shame and part desperate urgency. His contact here, it's someone on staff. Okafor went very still. Are you certain? I helped plan this operation, Darnell said, and the weight of those words sat in the room like a third person. Before I decided I couldn't go through with it, that's why they shot me. That's why they're here. He met the doctor's eyes. I'm the one who told them the layout. Midnight, 12 a.m. exactly. In the central corridor, Marco stopped moving. He was standing very still, his NVG scanning the darkness. And he was doing something that the other 3 men on his team were not capable of doing at the same level. He was listening. Not just for sounds, for the absence of sounds, for the pattern of what the building was not doing. Javier had gone quiet 8 minutes ago. He had not radioed. He had not called out. When Javier went quiet, it was never because things were going well. Rodriguez, he said barely above a whisper. Rodriguez's voice came back from the front entrance. Here. Javier is down. A pause. You're sure? I'm sure. Marco's jaw was tight. He was running the math. 2 men down in under 8 minutes, in total darkness, in a locked building. This was not random. This was not luck. Someone had turned those lights out, knowing exactly what would happen next. Someone had been in this building when they arrived and had used those 90 seconds of darkness with a level of tactical precision that had just cost him 2 of the best operators he had ever worked with. He thought again about the woman at the nurse's station, the one who hadn't been afraid. Marco had met a lot of people in his line of work who were not afraid of him. Most of them were reckless or delusional or simply hadn't understood what they were looking at yet. But this woman, she had looked at him the way he looked at people, like she was counting, like she was already 3 moves ahead and was simply waiting for him to catch up so the game could begin properly. He pulled the NVG from his eye and stood in the darkness without it. He was going to find her the way she was hunting him. Even. No advantages on either side. Rodriguez, he said, leave the doors. Come to me. 12 a.m. in 30 seconds. What Gianna had not anticipated, and she would think about this later, in the quiet that comes after, when the body stops running on adrenaline and the mind goes back over every decision like fingers tracing the edges of a scar. What she had not fully anticipated was the inside man. She was moving back toward the central corridor, having neutralized Javier with a speed and efficiency that she did not allow herself to feel anything about in the moment, when her phone buzzed. She had it on silent, but she felt the vibration against her hip. She pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. Different from the one before. He knows. He pulled NVG. Now he's going dark too. She stared at the text. Someone in this building was feeding information to Marco's team in real time. Someone who knew she had anticipated the night vision. Someone who was watching, or had been told, what was happening on this floor. The inside man was still active. She typed back, "Who is this?" The response came in 4 seconds. "Someone who made a mistake. Rodriguez is coming to Marco now. They're going to split the building. One goes for the patient, one waits for you. Marco takes the patient. He thinks you'll try to stop him. He's right. He wants you to come to him." Gianna read the message twice. Then she changed direction entirely. 12 a.m. in 50 seconds. She moved fast now, no longer hunting, repositioning. She needed to reach Trauma Bay 2 before Marco did, but she also couldn't let Marco know she was going there. If he was expecting her to come to him, then he was watching the approach vectors. He was waiting for her to make the move he had predicted. And a man like Marco, the fact that she was not making that move would tell him something was wrong before she wanted him to know it. She needed a distraction. She pressed the radio she had taken from Tomas, keyed it once, twice. The burst of static was brief, but in the perfect silence of the darkened building, it sounded enormous. She set the radio down on the floor near the East Corridor entrance and kept moving. 12 a.m. and 1 minute. Marco heard the static and his head turned. 40 feet east of his position. He moved toward it, weapon up, NVG back in place, because the darkness was the darkness, and pride was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. Rodriguez was 20 feet behind him, covering the rear. In Trauma Bay 2, the door opened. Gianna came in fast and low, pulling it shut behind her. Okafor looked up. His face in the narrow beam of his penlight was strained but steady. "We need to move him," she said, "right now." The corridor. Marco is east. We go west, down to radiology, through the service hall. She was already at Darnell's gurney, releasing the wheel locks. "Can you walk?" she asked him directly. Darnell looked at her. In the thin, pale light, his face had the particular expression of a man who has done something he cannot undo, and has accepted that the only path left is forward. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I can walk." "You won't need to." She had the gurney moving. "Dr. Okafor, take the IV pole. Stay on my left and stay close." They moved. The service corridor that ran behind the main ER floor was narrow and utilitarian. Supply carts, linen bins, the quiet infrastructure of a hospital that most patients never see. Gianna had memorized its layout within her first week at Memphis Regional. Old habit. They were 30 feet down the service corridor when Gianna heard footsteps behind them. Not Marco's footsteps. Different weight, different rhythm. She stopped the gurney, held up one hand. Okafor froze. Darnell didn't make a sound. The footsteps stopped. 12 a.m. in 3 minutes. "I know you're there," said a voice. It was not Marco's voice. It was quieter, less certain of itself. The voice of someone performing confidence rather than possessing it. Gianna turned slowly. The figure at the end of the service corridor was backlit by the faint glow of an exit sign, which meant she couldn't see the face. She could see the shape. Male, medium build, hospital ID badge still on the lanyard. "Staff. You're the inside man," she said. A pause. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt. Tell that to the receptionist Marco put a gun to when he walked in." Another pause. Longer this time. They said it would be clean, in and out. I just needed to give them the layout, the shift schedule." "Who are you?" Gianna asked. The figure took one step forward into slightly better light, and Gianna saw the face. Young, early 30s, dark circles under his eyes that weren't just from the night shift. The particular hollowed look of someone who has been carrying a secret that was much heavier than they thought it would be when they picked it up. It was Marcus, the patient care tech, the one she had asked to review lockdown procedures an hour ago, the one who had looked at her and said, "You look different." He had looked different too. She just hadn't known yet what the difference meant. "Marcus," she said, and kept her voice level. Not angry, not cold, just real. How much did they pay you? His jaw worked. Enough to get out. I got debts, Nurse Richie. I got a sister who needs... It doesn't matter now. He took another step forward. His hands were at his sides. No weapon, just a young man standing in a dark hospital corridor with the full weight of what he had done pressing down on him from every direction. Rodriguez has a radio. He knows where you are right now. I wanted you to know. Before he stopped. Gianna looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Give me your radio." He pulled it off his belt and held it out. His hand was shaking. She took it. "Get into the supply room at the end of this corridor. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but police. Do you understand me?" He blinked. I don't have time for you to finish that sentence," she said. "Go." He went. She heard the door click behind him. 12 a.m. in 6 minutes. She turned back to Darnell. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read in the darkness. Something between gratitude and a grief that had no clean name. "You knew who I was before tonight," she said. It wasn't a question. He was quiet for one beat. Two. Then, "The people I worked for, they had a file on you. Before you were a nurse. Before Pensacola." His voice was rough. "That's part of why I warned you when I came in. I knew if anybody in this building had a chance at surviving Marco." "Don't," she said quietly. He stopped. "Whatever is in that file," she said, "is not a conversation we're having right now." She started moving the gurney again. 12 a.m. in 8 minutes. Back in the main ER, Marco had found Tomas. He was alive, breathing, pulse present, but he was not waking up anytime soon. Marco knelt beside him for exactly 3 seconds, which was all the time he could give it, and then he stood. He had also found Javier in the East Corridor in exactly the same condition. Whatever Gianna had done to both of them, she had done it with the intention of incapacitation rather than elimination. She was leaving his men alive. He turned that information over in his mind like a stone he was looking for the meaning under. Why leave them alive? 2 explanations. Either she didn't have the means to do more, unlikely given what he'd seen of her efficiency, or she was making a choice, leaving them alive because she was operating under rules of engagement that his own employer had never once considered. She was not a killer. She was something rarer, something more disciplined, someone who had been trained to neutralize threats and had made the deliberate decision to use only the force necessary to protect and nothing beyond it. That told him everything about who she was and absolutely nothing about where she was. Rodriguez's voice crackled on the radio. "She's in the service corridor. West side. She has the patient." Marco turned toward the west corridor. He began to move. 12 a.m. and 11 minutes. The radiology suite was on the lower level, and it was where Gianna had been moving toward all along. Not just as a place to hide Darnell, but because it was the one part of the hospital that had a secondary exit. A loading dock entrance used for equipment delivery, heavy steel door with a code lock that opened directly to the east parking structure. She knew the code. She had memorized it on her second week of employment, along with the emergency generator override and the manual fire door release, because she was Gianna Ritchie, and she memorized these things the way other people memorize their coffee order. They reached the radiology suite. She got Darnell inside. She turned to Okafor. "Stay with him. Lock this door. The police should be here in the next 3 to 4 minutes. Do not open this door for anyone who cannot identify themselves by badge number and department." Okafor looked at her. "Where are you going?" She paused at the door. She thought about Kesha, behind the nurse's station desk upstairs, waiting in the dark. She thought about Marcus, locked in the supply room with his debts and his regrets. She thought about the receptionist who had a gun pressed to her head because of a job that Gianna was technically just a nurse. "I'm going to finish this," she said. Okafor started to say something. She had already gone. 12 a.m. in 13 minutes. She came up the service stairs fast, moving toward the sound of footsteps that she could now hear clearly. Two sets, converging from different directions. Rodriguez from the south, Marco from the east. They had split up to cover the corridor, which meant they were expecting her to run. They were not expecting her to move toward them. She had the advantage of knowing exactly where both of them were. Rodriguez had the radio. He had been broadcasting position updates. She had been listening. She came through the service door into the main corridor and moved right. Rodriguez was 12 feet away. He heard the door. He turned. She was already inside his reach before he completed the turn, and she used the next 4 seconds with a focused, relentless precision that left Rodriguez on the floor and the radio in her hand. 3 down, 1 left. The corridor was silent. She straightened. Her shoulder ached. Her left hand had a cut across the knuckle from Javier's belt buckle, an hour ago, which had been bleeding quietly this whole time, and which she had not stopped to acknowledge because it was not relevant. It was relevant now in the way that all postponed pain becomes relevant when the immediate emergency steps back even slightly. She held the radio in her hand. She pressed the transmit button. "It's just us now, Marco," she said. A long silence. Then his voice, and it was something she hadn't heard from him before. Not anger, not fear. Something she could only describe as respect, delivered with the particular restraint of a man who does not give it easily. "Where'd you train?" he said. She didn't answer. "Coast Guard," he said, and it wasn't quite a question. "The Spec Ops Unit. I heard about that program." Another pause. "I heard they were good." "They were," she said. "Were," he repeated, past tense. "I'm a nurse now." She could almost hear him, almost smile. "Yeah," he said, "I noticed." She heard his footsteps begin, steady and unhurried, from the direction of the central corridor. He was coming to her, not running, walking. The walk of a man who has accepted the terms of the last engagement of the night and is approaching it with the dignity of someone who understands exactly what it is. Gianna set the radio down. She rolled her left shoulder once. She breathed out slowly, and she walked toward the sound of his footsteps. They met in the dark the way 2 storms meet, not with noise, not with the dramatic collision that the word confrontation implies, but with a sudden, pressurized stillness, the kind that exists in the half-second before lightning decides which direction it wants to go. Gianna heard his breathing first, controlled, measured, the breathing of a man who had trained his body to stay quiet under stress, the way most people train it to stay still under a dentist drill. Through repetition, through discomfort, through the slow, grinding discipline of convincing your own nervous system that fear is just information, and information doesn't get to drive. She recognized it because it was her own breathing pattern. 12 a.m. in 16 minutes. She stopped walking when she estimated him at 10 feet out. He stopped at roughly the same moment. In the total darkness of the central corridor, they were 2 people who could not see each other, both of whom knew exactly where the other one was. "You've been counting my steps," he said. "Since the waiting room," she replied. A pause. "I had 4 men. You had 3, and a scared kid who made a bad decision." Something shifted in the silence. "Marcus," Marco said, and the way he said it, not surprised, just recalibrating, told her that he had already suspected the weakest link in his chain and had not been entirely wrong about which link it was. "He gave you position updates." "He had a conscience," Gianna said. "That wasn't in your original plan." "No," Marco admitted. "It wasn't." She was moving as she spoke, not toward him, sideways, changing the geometry of the space between them without changing the distance. In the dark, against an opponent with no visual input, lateral movement is invisible. It's the oldest trick in the book, and it works because the book was written by people who had survived long enough to write it. "You're moving," he said. She stopped. "So are you." Another silence. And in that silence, Gianna was doing something that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with the 12 years of her life that she had spent becoming the kind of person who could stand in a dark corridor across from a special forces contractor and not be the one who blinked first. She was reading him. Not his position, his psychology. The way he spoke, the precision of his language. The fact that he had not yet rushed her, not attempted to use volume or aggression to destabilize her, not done any of the things that lesser-trained men did when they felt control slipping. Marco was not trying to intimidate her. He was trying to understand her. And that told her something critical. He was more dangerous than she had initially assessed, because the most dangerous opponents are not the ones who come at you hard. They are the ones who come at you smart. "Tell me something," she said. "You're stalling," he said. "I'm talking," she corrected. "There's a difference. I'm stalling when I'm losing. I'm talking when I'm curious." She let that land. "Darnell said you're a contractor, private work, which means someone hired you. Who?" The pause this time was different, longer. Not the pause of a man deciding whether to answer, but the pause of a man deciding how much the answer costs him. "You know I'm not going to tell you that," he said. "I know you're not supposed to," she said. "That's different." 12 a.m. and 19 minutes. He moved. She felt it more than heard it, the shift of weight, the compression of the floor beneath his step, the way the air in the corridor reorganized itself around a body in motion. She dropped low and left simultaneously, and she felt his arm pass through the space where her head had been, with the clean, purposeful arc of a strike that had been aimed precisely and delivered with full commitment. He was fast, faster than Rodriguez, faster than Javier. She had known he would be. She came up and drove her elbow toward the sound of his exhale and connected with something, shoulder, upper chest, and felt the impact jar up her arm to the collarbone. He absorbed it without going back more than half a step. She heard him adjust his footing, heard the slight catch in his breath that told her it had hurt, even if it hadn't stopped him. "Good," he said, and he meant it. She didn't answer. She was already moving again, circling, keeping her breathing even. Her left hand was bleeding steadily now from the knuckle cut, and she could feel the warmth of it on her fingers, and she filed it away as irrelevant and kept moving. He swept low. She felt the disturbance at her ankles and jumped, clearing it, coming down slightly off balance and correcting fast. He followed the sweep immediately with a rising strike that caught her on the left forearm as she brought it up in a block, and the force of it told her exactly what she was working against. This was not a large man relying on size. This was a trained man relying on precision, on the multiplication of force through angle and timing, on years of building a body into a weapon that operated efficiently regardless of conditions. He had been trained to fight in the dark. So had she. 12 a.m. and 22 minutes. They separated, both breathing harder now, both adjusting. "You hit like someone who was trained at altitude," he said. The clinical observation was so incongruous in the middle of a fight in a dark hospital corridor that it almost made her laugh. Almost. "Fort Buchanan," she said. "You?" "Bragg, then elsewhere." He paused. "You left the service." "I became a nurse." "Why?" She didn't answer immediately. It was a real question. She knew it was a real question. And in the middle of a physical confrontation that could still go either way, in a dark corridor of a hospital where 3 of his men were unconscious on the floor, and a gunshot victim was hidden in the radiology suite, and the police were, she checked the internal clock she had been running since all of this started. Approximately 1 to 2 minutes out, Marco was asking her a real question. She answered it honestly. "Because I was tired of the other thing." A beat. "And yet, here you are." "Here I am," she said, "doing the other thing, to protect people from people like you." The silence after that was different from all the other silences. It had texture in it, something working through it that wasn't anger and wasn't calculation, and was possibly, She wasn't certain, but possibly something that lived closer to regret. He came at her again, and this time he was faster, the question and answer having served whatever purpose it served for him. And the next 40 seconds were the most concentrated and brutal of the entire night. He was technically superior to Tomas and Javier in the way that a master craftsman is superior to competent journeymen. Not just more skilled, but more efficient, wasting nothing, every movement serving multiple purposes simultaneously. A strike that was also a redirect, a block that set up the counter before she had finished delivering the original. She took 2 hits that she did not block in time. One to the ribs, she felt the sharp, white complaint of them and breathed through it. One to the jaw, glancing, enough to rattle her teeth and fill the back of her throat briefly with a copper taste of adrenaline and blood. She gave back a knee strike to his midsection that doubled him forward and an elbow to the back of his neck that sent him to one knee. He did not stay there. 12 a.m. and 25 minutes. He came back up fast, and in coming up, he caught her left wrist, the bleeding hand, and twisted, using the joint lock to drive her sideways into the wall. The wall was hard. She felt it along her shoulder and the side of her face. He had her wrist locked and her leverage compromised, and in a one-on-one ground control situation against someone with his training, the margin between controlled and finished was measured in fractions. She went with the wall instead of against it, used the surface, planted her foot, changed her angle, made herself impossible to pin by refusing to give him a stable target. And when he adjusted, she found the 2 inches of space she needed and drove her thumb into a nerve cluster just below his elbow with a precision that made his entire right hand go briefly numb. The grip broke. She was across the corridor and resetting before his hand came back online. They stood apart, both breathing, both still. 12 a.m. and 27 minutes. "You're protecting him," Marco said. His voice was slightly different now. The hit to his midsection had taken some of the controlled smoothness out of it. He was working harder than he had planned. "Darnell Watkins, you know what he is? What he does? The people he works for?" "I know what he told me," she said. "He told you what he needed to tell you to get you fighting his battles. He told me dangerous men were coming to finish him in a hospital," she said. "That part was accurate. He's not innocent, Nurse Ritchie. I know. He helped plan tonight. He helped plan everything that's happened to you in the last hour. He gave them your name, your background. He is the reason Marco's team knew what they were walking into." She went still. Not visibly, she kept her body ready, kept her weight distributed, kept herself in the physical posture of someone who could move in any direction in under a second. But something shifted internally that she could not entirely control. "You're Marco," she said. "Yes." "Then stop talking about Marco in third person," she said, and the edge in her voice was real. "And tell me what you just said again." A pause. And something happened that she had not predicted, and that she suspected he had not predicted either. He told her. Not because she'd asked, not as a tactical maneuver. He told her because it was true, and because something in the last 27 minutes of darkness had created a specific and strange gravity between these two people that neither of them had the emotional vocabulary to name. "Darnell worked intelligence," Marco said, "for the same organization that contracted us. When he decided to pull out, when he called the ambulance himself, which is the only reason he's alive, he didn't go clean. He took files, information, about operations, about people." He paused. "About you. A detailed file on your service record, your real service record, the one that doesn't exist officially. He compiled it as leverage." 12 a.m. and 29 minutes. Mini climax. Gianna's mind was running very fast in a direction she didn't entirely want it to run. "He used my file as leverage against who?" she said. Marco didn't answer. "Against who, Marco?" "The people who are going to come after him again," he said quietly. when I don't call in a clean operation in the next 6 minutes. She absorbed that. 6 minutes. She had less time than she thought, and the situation was more complicated than she had understood it to be, because it was no longer just about tonight. It was about whatever Darnell had been carrying when he climbed onto that ambulance, and whoever he had been planning to use it against, and whether any of the information he had compiled included enough about Gianna to make her visible to people she had spent 3 careful years being invisible to. She pushed that aside. Later. All of it, later. What happens in 6 minutes? She asked. I call in. If the call doesn't go through, or if it goes through and the word I use isn't the right word, they move to contingency. The contingency isn't 4 men. He let that sit. The contingency is not surgical. 12 a.m. in 31 minutes. She made a decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Not a comfortable decision, not a clean one. The kind of decision that she suspected she would turn over in her mind for a long time afterward, examining it from different angles, looking for the place where she should have chosen differently and not quite finding it. Make the call, she said. The silence stretched. You're not serious, Marco said. Make the call. Tell them the operation is compromised. Tell them to stand down the contingency. In exchange, she stopped. She took a breath. In exchange, you walk out of here before the police arrive. Your men get medical attention. Nobody presses charges on tonight beyond the initial break-in, which I will do everything in my power to make complicated for the investigators. You're letting me go, he said, and his voice had no performance in it, just the plain, unadorned astonishment of a man who has been in this business long enough to know that this is not how it works. After all of this, I'm protecting the people in this building, she said, which is what I was doing before you arrived, and what I'll continue doing after you leave. A contingency team arriving at this hospital while there are still patients and staff on the floor is not acceptable to me. Stopping that is worth more than your arrest. I could be lying about the contingency, he said, to create leverage. You could be, she agreed, but you're not. I've been listening to you for the last 30 minutes. You're not a liar. You're a lot of things. Not that. Another silence, longer than any of the others. You know they'll send someone else, he said. For Darnell, this doesn't end tonight. I know, she said, but tonight ends tonight. Make the call. 12 a.m. in 33 minutes. She heard him reach for his phone, heard him dial. The conversation was brief, 12 seconds, a code word she didn't recognize, a sentence in what sounded like modified military shorthand, and then silence. It's done, he said. Contingency is stood down. She breathed out, just once, just enough. There's a fire exit at the end of the south corridor, she said. It opens to the side street. Alarm will trigger, but the police response to it will take at least 90 seconds to redirect. That's your window. My men, he said, will receive the best emergency care available in Memphis, Tennessee, she said. I'll make sure of it personally. A pause. Why? Because that's what I do, she said simply. I take care of people. She heard him move toward the south corridor. She heard him stop. Richie, he said. She waited. The file Darnell has on you, the real one, he's going to use it, not against you directly, against the people who care about what's in it. You need to get to it before they do. She said nothing. I'm not telling you that because we're friends, he said. I'm telling you because... He stopped, started again. You fought clean tonight. Every man I brought in here is going to wake up. You didn't have to do it that way. Another pause, shorter. Not many people do it that way. She heard him walk away. She heard the fire exit open at the end of the corridor, the sharp bark of the alarm cutting through the silence of the building like the first sound after a held breath. And then the door closed and Marco was gone. 12 a.m. and 36 minutes. The alarm was still shrieking when the lights came back on. Kesha, from behind the nurse's station, had found the main breaker override on her phone's flashlight and had been waiting for what felt like a geological epoch for Gianna's signal. The signal had been 3 taps on the underside of the desk, their agreed code, delivered by Gianna's knuckle as she passed the station on her way back from the south corridor. The fluorescent lights came back on in their familiar, buzzing cascade, section by section, and the ER blinked back into existence like a patient coming out of anesthesia. Kesha stood up from behind the desk. She looked at Gianna. Gianna was standing in the center of the corridor. Her scrubs had a dark stain on the left forearm where the knuckle cut had bled freely through the fabric. There was a bruise forming along her jaw that would be spectacular by morning. She was standing straight, weight evenly distributed, hands at her sides, breathing steadily. "Are you?" Kesha started. "I'm okay," Gianna said. "You don't look okay." "I look better than the alternatives," Gianna said. Then before Kesha could say anything else, "I need medical carts to 3 locations. East Corridor, about 40 feet in, that's Tomas. The Trauma Bay Corridor entrance, that's Javier. The main corridor junction, Rodriguez. All 3 are unconscious. All 3 need assessment. Possible head trauma, possible—" "Gianna!" Kesha's voice cut through the clinical briefing with a firmness that stopped it cold. She walked around the nurse's station, walked directly up to Gianna, and looked at her face. Not the injuries, her face, the interior of it. "Are you okay?" The question, asked that way, with that precision, with that refusal to accept the professional deflection, hit Gianna somewhere she hadn't expected. She felt something shift in her chest, something that had been locked down for the last 42 minutes under the clean, necessary pressure of crisis management. The shift was brief. She controlled it, but Kesha saw it. "I will be," Gianna said, quieter this time. Kesha nodded once, the nod of a woman who knows the difference between a lie and a deferred truth. "Okay," she said. "Tell me where to go." 12 a.m. in 40 minutes. The police arrived in force at 12:41. 3 units, then 4, then a supervisor vehicle, and behind them, moving with the particular purposeful efficiency of people who had been notified and scrambled, and were now arriving on a scene that had already resolved itself. 2 unmarked sedans. Gianna watched them come through the main entrance from her position at the nurse's station, where she had been methodically completing incident documentation with her left hand wrapped in gauze and her right hand moving the pen with a steady calm of someone who had decided that paperwork was the appropriate response to the end of the world. The first officer through the door was young, 20-something, hand on his holster, eyes moving fast across the room. He saw Tomas on the gurney near the east corridor, being assessed by a nurse and a resident. He saw Rodriguez at the junction, conscious now and zip-tied with restraints from the supply closet, sitting against the wall with the particular posture of a man who was going to need a lawyer. He saw Javier being treated for what turned out to be a concussion and a fractured wrist. Then he saw Gianna. He walked to the nurse's station. "Ma'am, are you the one who called this in?" "Yes," she said. She set down her pen and looked at him directly. "There were 4 assailants. 3 are accounted for and on site." She pushed the incident documentation across the counter. "The 4th exited via the south fire door approximately 8 minutes ago. Medium build, dark jacket. I'd estimate he's on foot moving west toward the interstate access road." She paused. "He will not be difficult to identify. He left his NVG unit in the east corridor." The officer stared at her. He looked at the documentation. He looked at the 3 men in various states of consciousness around the ER floor. He looked back at her. "You did this?" he said, and immediately looked like he regretted how it sounded. "I'm a nurse," she said. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to—" One of the men from the unmarked sedans was at the officer's shoulder now. Mid-40s, gray suit, the particular manner of federal employment stamped into the set of his jaw. He showed credentials briefly. "I'll take it from here, officer." He looked at Gianna. "Ms. Ritchie, Special Agent Derek Holt, FBI, Memphis Field Office. I need to speak with you." "I assumed you would," she said. "Give me 4 minutes. I have a patient I need to check on." She didn't wait for his answer. She walked down to the service corridor, through the lower level, and into the radiology suite. 12 a.m. and 44 minutes. Dr. Okafor had been sitting in a chair next to Darnell's gurney, and the expression on his face when Gianna came through the door was the expression of a man who had spent 40 minutes in a locked room with a gunshot victim and his own thoughts, and was experiencing the emotional aftermath of both. Darnell looked up when she entered. Something crossed his face. Relief, yes, but underneath it something more complicated, something that already knew what was coming next. Because Darnell Watkins was not a stupid man. He had been an intelligence operative. He had read people for a living. And he had been lying in this room for 40 minutes thinking about what a woman with Gianna's training and Gianna's instincts would do once the immediate crisis was resolved. He had been thinking about what she would know by now, what Marco would or wouldn't have told her, whether the files were compromised, whether the entire architecture of the thing he had been carefully building as his exit strategy had just come apart in a Memphis emergency room at midnight. Gianna stood at the foot of the gurney. She looked at him for a long moment. "The file," she said. "Where is it?" Darnell looked at the ceiling, then back at her. "Encrypted server, off-site. I'm the only one with the access key. I need you to understand something," she said, and her voice was very calm and very quiet, and carried in it the particular weight of someone who means every syllable. "Those people out there, Kesha, Marcus, Dr. Okafor, every patient in this building tonight, they were put at risk because of that file, because of what you compiled on me, because of what you were planning to do with it." He held her gaze. "I know. So I need you to make me a decision," she said, "right now. Not tomorrow, not when the lawyers are involved, not when the FBI comes down here and starts offering you deals. Right now. Tonight. What are you going to do with it?" The room was quiet. The only sound was the soft, steady beeping of the monitor still tracking Darnell's pulse. 44 beats per minute, slower than normal. The heartbeat of a man who had been running for a long time and had finally, whether he chose it or not, stopped. He closed his eyes. He was quiet for a long time. When he opened them, something had shifted in his face. Not resolved, not healed, but decided. The specific expression of a person who has found the place in themselves where the right thing and the hard thing are exactly the same thing. "I'll give it to you," he said. "The server, the key, all of it." He paused. "On one condition." Gianna waited. "You let me explain," he said. "Not to the FBI, not tonight, to you. Everything. Why I got into this, what I was trying to do, who I was working for. All of it." His voice was raw. "I know I don't deserve that. I know that. But I need one person to understand it before it gets reduced to a case file and a plea deal and a number in a system." Gianna looked at him for a long time. Okafor was watching her. Darnell was watching her. The monitor was tracking its steady rhythm. "Okay," she said finally, "but right now the FBI is upstairs, and we're going to run out of time in about 30 seconds. She moved to the head of the gurney. "So you tell them what they need for tonight. You cooperate fully, and later, when the immediate is handled, I'll come back, and you'll tell me everything." Darnell nodded. The movement was small and exhausted and real. "One more thing," she said. "What?" "You call that ambulance yourself tonight," she said. "Getting yourself here. That took something." She held his eyes. "Don't waste it." She turned and walked back out the door. 12 a.m. and 47 minutes. Special Agent Holt was waiting at the radiology suite entrance when she came back up the stairs. He had the look of a man who had been briefed on the way over and was now standing in front of information that significantly exceeded the briefing. "Ms. Ritchie," he started. Nurse Ritchie, she said, not breaking stride. And yes, I know, you have questions. I have answers, but I need to wrap my hand first. She held up the gauze-wrapped knuckle, which had bled through the first layer and needed attention. 5 minutes. Holt fell into step beside her. I've seen the 3 individuals in your ER right now. I've read your initial incident report. He paused. I also ran your name through our system on the drive over. She kept walking. There are some significant gaps in your background, he said carefully. She said. Gaps that suggest I'm a night shift nurse in Memphis who had a very difficult evening, she said. She stopped at the supply closet and began redressing her hand with the neat, efficient movements of someone who has wrapped field injuries before. Which is exactly what I am. Holt watched her work. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the 4th assailant. You said he exited via the south fire door. That's right. You were alone with him, at the end, according to the timeline you laid out. He paused with the care of a man choosing his next words thoughtfully. There was approximately an 11-minute gap between your last confirmed sighting in this area and the fire exit alarm. She finished wrapping her hand. She looked at him. 11 minutes is a long time in an ER. It is, he said. A lot can happen. A lot did happen, she said. I wrote it in the report. He held her gaze. He was a careful man. She could see that. The kind of investigator who understood that some questions were better left asked slowly, or perhaps not at all, depending on what the larger picture required. We'll need a full debrief, he said. I'm available tomorrow, she said. Tonight, I have patients. She walked past him, back toward the main ER floor, toward the sound of radios and voices, and the particular organized chaos of a law enforcement response arriving after the fact to a situation that had already been resolved by someone who wasn't supposed to know how to resolve it. Behind her, Holt stood still for a moment. He looked at the report in his hand. He looked at the corridor she had disappeared into. He looked at the 3 trained, armed, incapacitated men being processed around the ER. He folded the report carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. He had a feeling this was going to be a very interesting debrief. The ER at 1 a.m. on a Wednesday morning should have been quiet. It never was. Not really. Not in Memphis. Not at Regional. But it had rhythms, predictable ebbs and flows that the night staff learned to read the way sailors read weather. Tonight, those rhythms had been shattered and reassembled into something nobody on the floor recognized. And the people moving through it were doing so with the particular careful precision of individuals who were still processing what had just happened while simultaneously being required to function as though they had not. Kesha was the one holding it together. She always was. She had moved between the 3 incapacitated men with the same focused professionalism she brought to every patient. Because whatever they had come here to do, they were in her ER now, and they were injured. And that was the beginning and end of the relevant information. Tomas had a severe concussion and a possible hairline fracture to the orbital bone. Javier was already in radiology getting a head CT. Rodriguez, who was conscious and restrained and had not said a single word since waking up, had a dislocated shoulder and a wrist that was bent at an angle that made the first-year resident visibly uncomfortable when he looked at it. Kesha had looked at it and written her assessment without flinching and moved on. 1 a.m. in 4 minutes. The waiting room had been cleared of civilians. The family consultation room, where Kesha had relocated the ambulatory patients earlier in the evening, was now being managed by 2 officers who were taking statements with the weary efficiency of people who had been doing this for a long time. Most of the patients hadn't seen much. Most of them had heard the initial confrontation, had been moved before the lights went out, and had spent the critical 45 minutes of the evening sitting in a consultation room with inadequate seating and no cell signal, wondering what was happening on the other side of a door they had been instructed not to open. One man, a 70-year-old retired postal worker named Earl, who had come in with chest pain that turned out to be indigestion, had reportedly spent the entire incident asleep in the corner chair and woken up only when the police arrived. He had looked around at the officers in the controlled chaos and the yellow crime scene tape beginning to appear at the entrance and said, "Did something happen?" and then asked if he could go home now. Officer Dawkins, taking his statement, had looked at him for a long moment and said he probably could. 1 a.m. in 8 minutes. Gianna was at the nurse's station. She had redressed her hand. She had cleaned the cut on her jaw, which was superficial but which would bruise deep and wide by morning. She had changed into fresh scrubs from the staff locker room, which felt simultaneously necessary and absurd, like putting on clean clothes in the middle of a fire, but which she did because the alternative was walking around in scrubs with Rodriguez's blood on the knee, and she had decided that was not going to be helpful for staff morale. She was updating patient charts, the 3 from before the incident, Darnell's initial intake assessment, the 2 patients who had been in treatment rooms when everything started and who had been quietly terrified for 45 minutes and who now needed their care plans picked back up as though nothing had happened. Special Agent Holt was sitting in a chair 7 feet from the nurse's station, watching her work. He had a notepad open on his knee and a pen in his hand, and he had not written anything in the last 11 minutes. He was thinking. "You can ask," Gianna said, without looking up from the chart. "I'm still formulating the questions," he said. "You don't seem like someone who needs long to formulate questions." "I don't usually," he said. "You're a special case." She looked up then, met his eyes with the flatline face, the one that gave nothing away, the one that Kesha had spent 4 years trying to decode. "I'm a night shift nurse who had an unusual evening," she said. "You incapacitated 3 trained operators in under 20 minutes in total darkness," he said, without heat, without accusation, the way a person states a fact that requires no editorial assistance. "Tomas Reed, that's the one in Trauma 1, has a file with the Department of Defense. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Syria. Javier Rios, same page, Special Forces, decorations that aren't listed publicly. Rodriguez, I'm still running." He paused. "These are not men who get incapacitated by nurses." "They do tonight," she said. Holt looked at her. "I ran what I could find on you in 40 minutes on a car ride," he said. "Gianna Ritchie, born 1987, Baltimore, Maryland. Nursing degree from University of Tennessee, 2016. Prior employment," he stopped. "Prior employment is where it gets interesting. Because before 2016, your record is selective. There are entries, but the entries are the kind of entries that tell me very precisely that someone went to some trouble to make sure the full picture wasn't easily accessible." Gianna set her pen down. She turned on her stool to face him fully. "Agent Holt," she said, "are you asking me who I am?" "I think I already know who you are," he said quietly. "I'm asking you what you want to do about it." 1 a.m. and 12 minutes. That question sat in the air between them with more weight than most questions she had been asked. What did she want to do about it? About tonight? About the 3 men on her ER floor and the one who had walked out a fire exit and the gunshot victim in the radiology suite who was holding an encrypted server key like a grenade with the pin already pulled. About the file that had her real name on it, her real history, the 12 years before Memphis, the work she had done in water, in darkness, in silence, in places that did not appear on the official record of anywhere. What did she want to do about it? She thought about that for a moment. She thought about Kesha, who was 15 feet away updating a chart with the same focused diligence she brought to every shift, who had hit a light switch in total darkness on Gianna's word alone and had not asked a single question she wasn't supposed to ask. She thought about Marcus, who was currently in a police interview room giving a statement with the shaking hands and the hollow eyes of a young man discovering that the consequences of a bad decision are always larger than the decision itself. She thought about Dr. Okafor, who had looked at her tonight with an expression that said, He had always suspected the woman he worked alongside was not entirely who she appeared to be, and had chosen, long before tonight, to trust the person rather than the file. "I want to go back to work," she said. Holt studied her. "It's not going to be that simple." "It never is," she said. "But that's what I want. I'm not interested in a recruitment conversation, Agent Holt. If that's where this is going." Something moved in his face. Surprise, briefly, then something that was possibly reassessment. "I haven't gotten there yet." "You were getting there," she said. "I've had this conversation before. Different people, different building, same destination." She picked her pen back up. "I left that world for a reason. And yet the world walked into your ER tonight," he said. She didn't answer that, because it was true and because there was nothing to say about true things that made them easier to carry. 1 a.m. in 17 minutes. Down the hall, the door to the room where they'd moved Darnell opened, and a second FBI agent, younger than Holt, sharp-faced, a woman named Agent Torres, whose name badge Gianna had clocked when she came in, stepped out and approached the nurse's station. "He's asking for her," Torres said to Holt, with a nod toward Gianna. Holt looked at Gianna. "You said you'd talk to him." "I said later," she replied. "It's later," he said, "and he's been talking to us for the last 20 minutes. He's given us the server location, the access key, and the names of 3 individuals in the organization above him." He paused. "He's also told us some things about you, about your file, about who has access to it." Gianna went still. Her pen stopped moving on the chart, the specific stillness of someone who is controlling a reaction that would prefer to be less controlled. "Who?" she said. "That's what he wants to tell you himself," Torres said. 1 a.m. in 20 minutes. Gianna walked down the hall. The room Darnell was in was one of the family consultation rooms. Standard hospital furniture, institutional carpet, a box of tissues on the side table that had not been there before Torres or one of the other agents had placed it there, either out of genuine consideration or as standard interview room protocol. Darnell was in the adjustable bed they'd moved him to, IV still in his arm, monitor still tracking his pulse. He looked smaller in this room than he had in the trauma bay. The trauma bay had the urgency of crisis around it. This room had the flat, fluorescent honesty of aftermath. He looked up when she came in. The expression on his face was the one she had expected. Complicated, layered, carrying more than it knew how to put down. "You talked to Marco," he said, not a question. "Yes," she said. She took the chair across from him and sat. "Tell me what you need to tell me." He was quiet for a moment. His hands were folded on the blanket over his lap, and he looked at them the way people look at things they've been examining for a long time without finding the answer they were looking for. "Your file," he said, "the one I compiled. I want you to understand why I built it, not to justify it, just so you understand." "Go ahead," she said. "The organization I work for, they'd been watching you for about 18 months before I got involved. Since you came to Memphis. Since you started at this hospital." He looked up from his hands. "They knew who you were. They knew your real background. And they were deciding whether to bring you back in, whether to use what they had on you as leverage to pull you back into operational work." Gianna's jaw tightened slightly. "And you compiled the file." "I compiled it because I was trying to build a complete picture," he said. "And when I built the picture, when I saw everything, I saw that you had genuinely left, that you had genuinely built something here, that you were—" He stopped, started again. "That you were the kind of person who should be left alone." "But you didn't leave me alone," she said. "No," he said, "because I also saw that they weren't going to. Whether I cooperated or not, they had enough to move on you. So I compiled a version I controlled, a version that had what they needed but that I could. I was going to be the gatekeeper. I was going to manage what they could access and what they couldn't." Gianna looked at him for a long time. And then you decided to get out. And then I decided to get out, he said. And the file became the only leverage I had, the only thing that kept me from being disposable. His voice was raw. I know what I did. I know I made you a piece on a board you didn't know you were on. I know there's no clean way to apologize for that. 1 a.m. in 26 minutes. Twist. Holt said you told them who has access, she said. Darnell nodded slowly. 3 people above me in the chain. One of them, he stopped. He looked at her face with the expression of someone who is about to deliver information that they know will hit hard and has been dreading the delivery for the entire conversation. One of them is someone you know, someone who's been here, in Memphis, in this hospital. The air in the room changed. Say the name, Gianna said. Her voice was completely flat. His name is Richard Caulfield, Darnell said. He goes by Rich. He works for the hospital administration. He's been on staff here for 14 months. The silence that followed was very specific. It was not the silence of shock. Gianna did not shock easily. But it was the silence of recalibration, of a person pulling a map they thought they understood and finding that one of the landmarks had been in the wrong location the whole time. Richard Caulfield. She knew him. Medium height, late 40s, always slightly overdressed for the administrative role. The kind of man who remembered everyone's name and used it often, which was either genuine warmth or a carefully maintained social tool, and which she had never entirely decided between. He had been in the hospital the night she arrived. He had been in the hospital tonight. She ran through the last 14 months of interactions with him in the space of 3 seconds. The staff meetings, the corridor conversations, the times she had noticed him watching the ER floor from the administrative mezzanine with an attentiveness that she had attributed to institutional oversight. Not oversight, intelligence gathering. Where is he now? She said. That's what I told the FBI, Darnell said. That's why they want you to know, because they think he may know tonight went wrong. And if he knows tonight went wrong, he may try to move on you before they can bring him in. 1 a.m. in 29 minutes. Gianna stood up from the chair. She was already running through the building layout in her head. The administrative offices, the mezzanine level, the routes in and out. Holt was going to move on Caulfield. That was his job and he was going to do it. But the window between Caulfield learns the operation failed and Caulfield is in federal custody was a window with uncertain width. And Gianna Ritchie had spent enough of her professional life understanding what happened in uncertain windows. She was at the door when Darnell's voice came from behind her. Gianna. She stopped. It was the first time he had used her first name. She turned. He's not in his office, Darnell said. When things go wrong on an operation, the protocol is to get eyes on the variable. The variable is you. He met her eyes. He's in the building. 1 a.m. and 31 minutes. She walked out of the room and directly to Holt, who was still at the nurse's station. Caulfield is in the building, she said without preamble. He's been here tonight. He knows the operation failed. He came to assess. Holt was on his feet immediately. Torres, he called down the hall, and Torres appeared at the far end, hand already moving toward her radio. Building lockdown, we're looking for a Richard Caulfield, hospital administration, late 40s. He may be armed. He will be armed, Gianna said. He is always armed. He carries a .40 caliber on his right hip under his jacket. He's been carrying it in this building for 14 months, and nobody noticed because the administrative staff don't go through the same security screening as visitors. Holt stared at her. How do you know that? Because I noticed, she said simply. I notice everything. He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then he was on his radio, giving descriptions, directing his agents to the building exits, requesting the officers outside to seal the perimeter. Gianna stepped back from the nurse's station and stood very still for a moment, and she was doing what she had been doing all night, reading the building, feeling the way it breathed, understanding where a man like Caulfield would go when his options were narrowing. Not toward the exits. The exits were compromised now. Police outside, agents inside, the building going into lockdown protocol. Toward the highest ground, the best vantage point, the place where a man running an intelligence operation would instinctively go when the operation collapsed, and he needed to see the full picture before deciding his next move. The mezzanine, 1 a.m. and 34 minutes. She took the east stairwell. She went up without running. Running creates noise, and noise is information given to the wrong people. And she pushed through the door at the mezzanine level with the flatline face and the steady hands and the particular quality of attention that had kept her alive in worse situations than this one. Richard Caulfield was standing at the mezzanine railing, looking down at the ER floor below. He was wearing a charcoal jacket, and his hospital ID badge was still around his neck, which struck her as the specific irony of a man who had maintained his cover so long that the props had become instinctive. He heard the door and turned, and his face went through 4 distinct expressions in under 2 seconds. Surprise, recognition, calculation, and then a smooth, managed neutrality that was the professional mask clicking back into place. "Nurse Richie," he said, "quite a night." "Step away from the railing, Rich," she said. His right hand was at his side, very close to the hem of his jacket. "I was just watching the activity downstairs," he said, trying to understand what happened. "You understand what happened," she said. "Your 4-man team is in custody or gone. Darnell is alive and talking. The FBI has the server." She kept her eyes on his right hand. "There's no move left on this board." His jaw tightened, just slightly. The mask was good, but it had limits. "You know, I've been watching you for over a year," he said, and the conversational tone of it was almost impressive in its consistency. "You're extraordinary. The way you work, the way you think, the way you see things other people miss." He took one small step toward the railing. No, she realized, not toward the railing. Toward an angle, changing the geometry of the space between them. She adjusted. "Don't," she said. He stopped. "The people I work for have been trying to decide what to do with you for 18 months, he said. "I argued that you were more valuable as a willing participant than a coerced one. I argued that given the right conversation, the right offer, you might come back in." He paused. "Was I wrong?" "You were wrong about the method," she said. "Building a file on me, sending 4 men into my ER. That is a very poor way to start a conversation." "I didn't authorize tonight," he said, and something moved in his voice that she might, in a different context, have called genuine. "The people above me, they lost patience. They decided to use the leverage directly. I was not," he stopped. "I was not in agreement with the approach." "But you didn't stop it," she said. He was quiet. "You knew it was happening," she said. "You knew Marco was coming tonight. You could have warned me. You could have called it off. You didn't. By the time I knew the timeline, it was..." "Don't," she said again, and this time the word was different. Not tactical, personal. The word of someone who has heard every version of "I had no choice" and has stopped accepting them. "Don't tell me you had no options. You always have options. You just don't always like the cost." 1 a.m. and 38 minutes. His hand moved, not fast enough. She was already inside his reach when the jacket hem came up, her left hand going to his wrist and redirecting the draw, while her right elbow came across in a strike that hit the inside of his forearm with enough force to make his grip on the weapon go involuntary. The gun hit the mezzanine floor with a hard crack and slid toward the railing. He was not untrained. He countered fast, faster than she had expected from an administrator, which confirmed several things she had suspected about his background. And for a moment, they were locked in the specific, controlled struggle of 2 people who both know what they're doing and are both deciding how far to take it. She took it further than he was prepared for. 12 seconds. He was against the wall with his wrist locked behind him and his breathing coming hard and uneven. and she had her forearm across his shoulder blades, holding him in place with a pressure that was precisely calibrated to be immobilizing without being damaging. "Hands," she said. He didn't resist. She felt the last of the fight go out of him. Not the physical fight, which had already ended, but the deeper one, the strategic one, the one that a man runs in his head until the moment he recognizes that every path has closed. She held him there until she heard Holt's footsteps on the stairwell, and then Torres coming in behind him, and then the efficient sounds of federal custody being established, the handcuffs, the Miranda words said by a voice that had said them many times, the radio communication confirming acquisition of the target. Holt looked at Caulfield. He looked at Gianna. He looked at the gun on the mezzanine floor. "Is there anyone in this building," he said very carefully, "that you haven't handled tonight?" "Earl," she said. He looked at her blankly. "The man with indigestion," she said. "He slept through the whole thing." 1 a.m. and 42 minutes. Holt took Caulfield down the stairs. Torres stayed for a moment, collecting the weapon from the floor, bagging it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had worked evidence collection long enough to do it on autopilot. She glanced at Gianna. The look was brief, but not small. "You were Coast Guard Spec Ops," Torres said. It came out halfway between a statement and a question. "I was a lot of things," Gianna said. "Right now I'm a nurse." She paused. "Who needs to get back to her floor?" Torres nodded slowly. "There are going to be a lot of questions," she said. "Tomorrow, next week. The investigation into Caulfield alone is going to take months." "I know," Gianna said. "And Darnell's information, the names he gave us tonight, those operations are going to unravel for a long time. Which means the people at the top of that chain are going to know your name before long, if they don't already." Gianna held Torres's eyes. The agent was not trying to frighten her. She was being honest. Professional to professional honest, which was its own particular language. "I know that too," Gianna said. "And?" Torres said. Gianna thought about it. She thought about the mezzanine and the stairwell and the dark corridor where she and Marco had stood on opposite sides of something neither of them had chosen, and both of them had navigated with the best of what they had. She thought about Kesha, downstairs, making sure every patient on the floor was accounted for and cared for, because that was who Kesha was, completely and without qualification. She thought about what it meant to be good at two things that had nothing in common except the person doing them. "And I'm going back to work," she said. 1 a.m. and 46 minutes. The ER at 1:46 a.m. was a different kind of chaos than the one at midnight. It was the chaos of resolution, of crime scene tape and interview forms, and the slow, careful unpacking of what had happened. The kind of chaos that looks messy from the outside and is actually organized from the inside by people who understand the difference between what needs to happen now and what can wait. Gianna walked back onto the floor. She walked to the nurse's station. She sat down on her stool. She picked up her pen. She opened the chart she had been updating before Holt's questions had redirected her, and she found her place on the page, and she continued. Kesha appeared at her left elbow approximately 40 seconds later, which was about how long it had taken Kesha to process the sight of Gianna coming back to charting after everything that had happened, and to decide that the appropriate response was not to say anything at all about any of it, and to simply stand there in the particular way that people who love each other stand next to each other when words are insufficient. "Caulfield," Kesha said quietly. "Rich Caulfield." "Yes," Gianna said. 14 months, Kesha said. "He was at your welcome party. When you transferred in, he brought a cake from that bakery on Madison." "I know," Gianna said. "How do you—" Kesha stopped herself. She took a breath. "How do you live like this? Knowing what you know, seeing what you see, walking into this building every day and—" She stopped again, and when she continued, her voice was quieter, more careful with itself. "How do you do this and still be you? Still be the person who remembers Mrs. Patterson's daughter's name and who makes sure the overnight staff has coffee and who, she ran out of words, which was rare for Kesha. How? Gianna set her pen down. She turned on her stool to look at her friend. This woman who had hit a light switch in total darkness, on her word alone, who had moved patients through a building under threat without flinching, who had stood in the middle of the worst night of this hospital's recent history and had held the floor together through the force of her own steady, irreplaceable humanity. Because of people like you, Gianna said, and it was the simplest and most true thing she had said all night. Kesha looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised both of them. She put her hand briefly over Gianna's wrapped, bandaged left hand, pressed once, and then straightened up and went back to her chart. Nothing else needed to be said. And sometimes, in the particular way that hospitals teach you, if you work in them long enough, the best thing, the most healing thing, the thing that costs the most and means the most, is the return to ordinary work, the resumption. The proof that the world kept its continuity, that the night went on, that the people in these beds still needed care, and the people providing it were still standing. 2 a.m. and 14 minutes. Gianna finished her charts. She stood up, stretched her back, and did a floor check. A quiet walk through the trauma bays, the patient rooms, the corridors. She looked in on Tomas and Javier, both stable, both unconscious, both receiving the care they needed with the impersonal thoroughness of an ER that did not discriminate between the people who had come to protect and the people who had come to harm. She checked on the 2 patients who had been in treatment rooms during the incident. One had fallen asleep and the other was watching something on his phone with earbuds in, which was either an admirable display of calm or a profound indifference to the surrounding environment. She stopped at the door of the room where she'd last seen Darnell. An FBI agent was posted outside. The agent looked at her. She nodded. She kept walking. At the end of the corridor, she stopped. She stood at the window that looked out at the ambulance bay. The same window she had looked out of 100 times on 100 ordinary nights, watching the city do what cities do in the small hours. Rain-slicked pavement, the sodium glow of the streetlights, an ambulance backing in with its lights running, but no siren, the low-urgency approach of a transport rather than a trauma. She stood there for a moment and let herself feel it. Not all of it, not the full weight, not tonight, not while there was still work to do and a floor to cover, and patients who needed their nurse present in both the professional and human sense. But enough. A thin, honest sliver of what the night had actually been. She was tired. Her jaw ached. Her hand throbbed with the steady, democratic persistence of a wound that had been patient while everything else was happening and was now presenting its bill. Her shoulder, where she had taken the hit from Marco's initial charge in the dark corridor, was going to complain loudly by morning. She was tired, and she was still standing. And everyone in this building, everyone who had been here when those doors opened at 11:54 p.m., was going to go home. That was enough. It had to be enough. In her experience, it always had been. Behind her, down the hall, she heard Kesha's voice, confident and warm, talking to a patient, that specific tone that nurses develop when they're managing pain and fear simultaneously with professionalism and genuine care. She heard the monitor rhythms. She heard a radio somewhere crackle with routine police communication. She heard the ambulance bay doors open as the new transport came in. She turned from the window and walked back to her station. 2 a.m. and 18 minutes. Holt found her one more time before he left for the night. He appeared at the nurse's station with his notepad and his pen and the face of a man who had been given more material in one shift than he had expected to need and was in the early stages of understanding what it was going to mean for the next several months of his professional life. Caulfield is in custody, he said. He's already asking for his lawyer, which means he's not going to be immediately cooperative. But we have enough from Darnell and from the server to start building the larger case. He paused. This goes significantly higher than tonight's operation. The people above Caulfield, the names Darnell gave us, these are not small actors. I know, she said, which means the investigation is going to involve you, he said, whether you want it to or not. Your background, the file Darnell compiled, it's going to be part of the evidentiary record. I know that too, she said. I want to be upfront with you, Holt said, and something in his voice shifted to a register that was less agent and more straightforward human being. The Bureau is going to want to talk to you about your prior service, about what you did before this. It's going to, he paused, choosing words with care. It may complicate the life you've built here. I can't promise it won't. She looked at him steadily. Are you warning me? I'm being honest with you, he said. You deserve that much. He closed his notepad. You also deserve to know that what you did tonight, the way you handled this, the fact that 3 men are alive who could easily not be, the fact that there are patients in this building who have no idea how close tonight came to being catastrophic, that's going to be on record too. She was quiet for a moment. Is that supposed to make me feel better? I don't know what's supposed to make you feel better, he said frankly. I only just met you. He tucked the notepad into his jacket. But I've been doing this job for 19 years, and I've walked into a lot of aftermath. This is the cleanest, most professionally managed aftermath I've ever walked into. And I wanted you to know that someone noticed. He offered his hand. She shook it. I'll be in touch tomorrow, he said. Get some rest. He left. She watched him go. Get some rest. As though rest were a straightforward proposition. As though she would go home at the end of this shift and lie in a quiet room and let her mind settle into the dark and simply stop. She had never once in her adult life been able to do that after a night like this one. Her body would sleep when it had no choice, and her mind would spend those sleeping hours running the film backward and forward, examining every decision, every second, every moment where things could have gone differently until she had squeezed every possible lesson from it and filed it in the place where she kept the things that had shaped her. She was already doing it now, already replaying the corridor, the dark, Marco's footsteps, already thinking about what Caulfield's arrest meant for the people above him in a chain that Darnell had described as long and well-resourced and not accustomed to operational failures. Already thinking about tomorrow. But that was tomorrow. And right now, at 2:21 a.m., a woman was being wheeled in through the ambulance bay with a blood pressure of 190/110 and a history of hypertension, and a husband running alongside the gurney who was holding her hand with both of his and saying her name over and over in the low, desperate prayer of someone who needs the person they love to hear them. Gianna stood up from her stool. She walked to the ambulance bay doors. She met the gurney and fell into step beside it, and her hands went to work, and her voice came out steady and warm and present, fully present the way she had learned to be present, which was the hardest thing she had ever learned and the most important. I've got her, she said. What's her name? Diane, the husband said. His face was wrecked with fear. Her name is Diane. Okay, Gianna said. She looked at Diane, who was conscious, who was frightened, who was looking up at the fluorescent lights of the ER ceiling with the wide, unmoored eyes of someone who had not chosen to be here tonight. Diane, my name is Gianna. I'm your nurse tonight. You're in good hands. Diane looked at her. Something in Gianna's face, the steadiness of it, the absolute bedrock calm of it, seemed to reach through the fear and touch something that fear hadn't gotten to yet. Her breathing slowed slightly. Her grip on her husband's hand loosened just enough. Okay, Diane said. They went through the doors together, and the ER received them the way it received everyone, without judgment, without hesitation, with the same institutional light and the same steady beeping, and the same people who had been here all night doing what they came here to do. Gianna kept moving. She always did. Diane's blood pressure came down by 3 a.m. Slowly, then steadily, the numbers moving in the right direction, the way good numbers always eventually do when the right people are paying attention. Her husband, whose name was Gerald, and who had not let go of her hand for a single minute since they arrived, finally sat down in the chair beside her bed at 3:15 and exhaled for what sounded like the first time in hours. He looked up at Gianna when she finished updating the monitor, and his face had that particular expression. Exhausted, raw, the specific vulnerability of a man who had been terrified and was now on the other side of it and didn't quite know what to do with his own relief. "She's going to be okay," he said. "Her pressure is responding well to the medication," Gianna said. "We're going to keep her through the morning for observation. But yes, she's going to be okay." Gerald nodded. He looked at his wife, who had fallen into a light sleep. He looked back at Gianna. "You've had quite a night," he said quietly, in the way that people sometimes say things that are significant understatements while being fully aware of that fact. He had noticed the bruise along her jaw. He had noticed the wrapped hand. He had seen enough of the police presence in the corridor to understand that something had happened here that was well beyond ordinary. "Every night is something," Gianna said. She offered him a small, genuine smile. "Try to get some rest." She left the room and walked back to the nurse's station, and for a moment, just one, she stood at the station and let the ER exist around her without managing it, without reading it, without assessing it for threats or variables or the geometry of potential disaster. She just let it be what it was, a place where people came when they were hurt and scared and needed someone steady to be present with them in the worst hours of their lives. It was 3:22 a.m., and the worst of the night was behind them, or so she thought. 3 a.m. in 25 minutes. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, different from the ones earlier in the night. She looked at the screen. "I need to speak with you. Not tonight, tomorrow. This matters. M." She stared at the text for a long moment. Then she put the phone in her scrub pocket and finished her notes on Diane's chart. She would think about that text in the daylight, when she had sleep behind her and the night's adrenaline fully metabolized, and the clear-eyed assessment that morning allowed. Right now she had 40 minutes left on her shift, and 3 patients who needed her attention, and a floor that had been through an extraordinary amount in the last 3.5 hours. She was halfway down the hall toward the last patient room when Kesha appeared from around the corner, moving fast enough that Gianna automatically read her posture. Urgent, controlled, professional, not crisis. Not another crisis, something else. "Marcus," Kesha said quietly, "he's asking for you." 3 a.m. and 28 minutes. Marcus was in one of the small consultation rooms off the main corridor, and the police interview had evidently concluded because the officer who had been with him was gone. He was alone in the room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and the expression of a young man who had been turned inside out by the last several hours, and was not yet sure which way he was supposed to face. He looked up when Gianna came in. He looked at her jaw. He looked at her wrapped hand. Something moved through his face that was equal parts guilt and grief, and the particular self-recrimination of someone who has had a long time to sit alone with the full weight of what their choices cost other people. "I didn't know it was going to be like that," he said. "When they came to me, when he approached me 6 months ago and told me." He stopped. His hands were around the cold coffee cup and his knuckles were white. "He told me it would never touch anyone in this hospital, that it was just information, layout, schedules, personnel backgrounds. He said nobody would ever come here, that it was just contingency planning." Gianna sat down across from him. She didn't say anything yet. She let him talk. "I have $40,000 in medical debt," he said, and his voice cracked on the number the way voices crack when they've been holding a specific shame for a long time, and finally set it down. "My mom, last year, she had a cardiac event and she didn't have insurance and I had nothing. I was making $16 an hour and she was in the ICU for 3 weeks and He stopped. He pressed his lips together hard. Caulfield knew. He found out somehow. He came to me like it was a favor, like he was helping me. $50,000. Pay off the debt, have money left. Just give him what he asked for. And you said yes, Gianna said. And I said yes, he said. The room was quiet for a moment. Through the wall, faintly, they could hear the ordinary sounds of the ER continuing its work. The sounds of people being cared for. Did you tell the FBI all of this? She said. Everything, he said. All of it. Every conversation with Caulfield. Every piece of information I gave him. He looked at her directly. I'm going to face whatever comes from that. I'm not asking you to. I don't expect anything from you. Then why did you ask to see me? She said. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw worked. Because you told me to get into that supply room, he said. When I'd done what I did, you could have turned me over to the police right there. You could have let them deal with me. But he stopped. You got me out of the way. You protected me too, even after what I did. He shook his head slightly. I just needed to say that I know that I see what you did, his voice broke fully this time and he let it. I'm sorry for all of it. Gianna looked at him for a long time. She thought about a 22-year-old with $40,000 of debt and a mother in the ICU and a man in a charcoal jacket who had shown up with a number that made all of it go away. She thought about the specific, merciless vulnerability of that kind of desperation, the kind that doesn't announce itself as weakness, but as a door that appears in a wall you'd stop believing had any doors. Marcus, she said, you sent me position updates tonight, in the dark. When Rodriguez had that radio, she held his eyes. You knew what I was doing and you helped me do it. That matters. He looked at her like a man who hadn't expected to be given anything and didn't quite know how to receive it. Cooperate fully with the investigation, she said. Tell them everything. And when this is behind you, and it will be behind you, eventually, come back to this work if they let you. Because you're good at it. Before tonight, you were good at it. She paused. Be good at it again. He nodded. His chin was unsteady. He didn't trust his voice enough to use it, which she understood. She stood up and walked to the door. And Marcus, she said. He looked up. Call your mom. 3 a.m. and 34 minutes. She was back at the nurse's station when the text came in from Holt. Brief, professional, the text of a man who communicated efficiently even at 3 in the morning. Caulfield gave us 2 names above him, bigger than we anticipated. You'll want to know. Call me when you're awake. She put the phone down. 2 names above Caulfield. She thought about Darnell's description of the organization, long and well-resourced. She thought about Marco saying, the people who are going to come after him again. She thought about the encrypted server and what it contained and how many people it implicated and how many of those people were going to wake up tomorrow morning and begin calculating their exposure. She thought about her own name, in a file, on a server, in the hands of people she had spent 3 careful years being invisible to. She had known, somewhere underneath tonight's operational clarity, that this was coming, that the quiet she had built in Memphis, the good, necessary, genuine quiet of a life that was actually a life and not just a mission, was going to be interrupted eventually. She had known it the way you know something you've stopped checking on because checking on it only makes it more real. She had known, and she had chosen to keep working, keep showing up, keep being the nurse in the scrubs who remembered patients' names and made sure the overnight staff had coffee. Because that was real. That was also real. 3 a.m. and 41 minutes. Twist. The fire exit at the end of the south corridor open. Not an alarm. The alarm had been reset after Marco's exit. The door simply opened, quietly, and closed. Gianna heard it the way she heard everything. Not consciously, not dramatically, but the way a tuned instrument responds to a specific frequency. Her head came up from the chart. Her hands went still. She waited. Footsteps in the south corridor. One person, unhurried, the walk of someone who had been here before, who knew the layout, who was not trying to be stealthy because stealthiness was not the message they were trying to send. She stood up from the stool. She was around the nurse's station and in the corridor mouth before the footsteps reached the junction. Marco stopped when he saw her. He was not in the dark jacket anymore. He was in a gray shirt and dark pants, and without the operational gear, he looked simultaneously less threatening and somehow more real. He had a cut above his left eye from their encounter in the corridor, neatly closed with a butterfly strip, the kind of field dressing you put on yourself in a car mirror. His hands were visible, empty. They looked at each other. "You texted me," she said. "I said tomorrow," he said. "I'm still working," she replied. "Which makes this still tonight." He looked down the corridor, looked back at her. "I told you they'd send someone else for Darnell," he said. "I wasn't being rhetorical." "I know," she said. "I have a name," he said. "The next contractor they're moving on this. Timeline is 48 hours. They're not going to make the same mistake twice. They're not sending a team. They're sending one person, someone who works differently than I do." Gianna went very still. "Why are you telling me this?" He held her eyes. The question was fair and he treated it as fair. He didn't deflect it and he didn't reach for a convenient answer. He stood in the corridor of Memphis Regional Medical Center at 3:41 in the morning and he thought about it honestly, which she could see him doing. And when he answered, it was with the same stripped-down directness that had characterized every exchange they'd had since the lights went out. "Because you fought clean," he said. "Because 3 of my men are going to wake up in this hospital instead of not waking up. Because you made a deal with me in the dark and you kept it," he paused. "And because the person they're sending next, she doesn't fight clean. And I'm not willing to be the reason this building becomes something it shouldn't be." She absorbed that. She thought about 48 hours. She thought about Darnell in federal protective custody, which Holt's text implied but hadn't confirmed. She thought about the 2 names above Caulfield and how motivated those names would be to close the leak in their organization before the federal investigation got traction. "Give me the name," she said. He told her. She memorized it in the way she memorized everything, immediately and completely, filed in the specific mental architecture of someone for whom information was always a resource. "You could go to the FBI with this yourself," she said. "I could," he agreed. "I'm going to. I'm walking out of here to make that call." He held her gaze. "I wanted you to know first." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had come through her doors tonight with a weapon and a mission, and had left through a fire exit, having become, in the space of 45 extraordinary minutes, something that defied the category she had initially assigned him. "You're going to have a complicated next few months," she said. "I've had complicated years," he said. "A few months seems manageable." He glanced down at her wrapped hand. "Take care of that." "Take care of that," she said, with a nod toward the butterfly strip above his eye. He almost smiled, the same almost smile from the dark corridor, the one that was worse than a real smile and better than most. Then he turned and walked back down the south corridor and through the fire exit, and the door closed behind him, and he was gone. 3 a.m. and 46 minutes. She stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone and called Holt. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he hadn't been sleeping either. "Richie, I have a name for you," she said, "and a timeline. 48 hours. She paused. "You need to move Darnell tonight." A beat of silence, then, "Where are you getting this?" "From someone who's about to call you directly," she said. "He'll give you everything. In the meantime, move Darnell. Tonight." Another pause. She could hear Holt processing, recalibrating, the sound of a professional mind reorganizing its priorities at 3:46 in the morning, without complaint, because that was the job, and that was who he was. "All right," he said. "I'll make the call." He paused. "Are you safe?" The question surprised her slightly. Not its professionalism, but its texture, the way it was asked. Like it mattered beyond the operational. Like the person asking it was a person and not just a federal agent running an investigation. Yes, she said. I'm safe. Okay, he said. And then, get some sleep, Richie. You've done enough for one night. She hung up. She stood in the quiet corridor and she breathed, once, deeply, the way she breathed when something was finished, and the body needed to acknowledge it before the mind could fully move on. Then she walked back to the nurse's station. 4 a.m. and 3 minutes. The shift change happened at 7. Gianna had 3 hours left, and she used all of them the way she always used the last hours of a shift, completely. She checked on Diane, whose pressure had held steady through the night, and whose husband was asleep in the chair beside her, with his head tipped back, and his mouth slightly open, and his hands still loosely wrapped around his wife's. She checked on the 2 patients from before the incident, who were both stable and both relieved in the particular way that people are relieved when the worst doesn't happen. She checked on Tomas, who had been moved to a monitored bed and who was beginning to show the early signs of consciousness, slight movement, a change in breathing rhythm, and who would wake up in a few hours in a hospital room in Memphis, Tennessee, with a federal agent posted outside his door and a very significant number of questions to answer. She wrote her incident report, all of it structured and precise, in the language of clinical documentation, which was its own kind of language, factual, sequential, stripped of the emotional textures that made up the actual experience of the events it described. She wrote it the way she had been trained to write it. What happened, in what order, with what outcomes. She wrote Caulfield's name in the narrative section and did not allow herself to feel anything particular about the fact that she was writing it. She was finishing the last section of the report when Kesha came back from a patient room and stood across the station from her. And the look on Kesha's face was the one she wore when she had been thinking about something for a long time and had finally arrived at what she needed to say. I have questions, Kesha said. I know, Gianna said. She kept writing. Real questions, Kesha said. Not the FBI kind. Not the how many and when kind. She paused. The kind where I've been working next to you for 4 years and I thought I knew you. Gianna set her pen down. She looked at her friend. You know me, she said. I know the version you gave me, Kesha said. Not accusatory, just honest. The particular honesty of someone who is trying to navigate a complicated feeling without letting the complication poison something real. And I don't regret trusting that version. I don't. But tonight, she stopped. She pressed on. Tonight you took out 3 trained military contractors in the dark, and you came back to charting. Tonight you stood in a corridor with the man who organized all of this, and you made a deal, and you let him walk. Tonight you were, she searched for the word, you were someone I didn't entirely recognize. And I need to know if the person I've been working with for 4 years is still in there somewhere. Gianna was quiet for a moment. The ER moved around them. A monitor beeped its patient rhythm down the hall. The overhead lights buzzed their indifferent buzz. She's the same person, Gianna said finally. The one who works next to you every night. The one who is here. She held Kesha's eyes. The other part, the part you saw tonight, it doesn't replace this. It's also there. It's always been there. She paused. I wasn't hiding it from you to deceive you. I was hiding it because I was trying to let it stay in the past. And now it won't, Kesha said. And now it won't, Gianna agreed. Kesha absorbed that. She looked at the nurse's station, at the charts, at the quiet evidence of an ordinary shift arranged around the extraordinary wreckage of the night. Are you in danger? She said. Going forward? Is this going to keep coming? Gianna thought about 48 hours, and the name Marco had given her, and the 2 names above Caulfield, and the long, well-resourced chain of people who now had a reason to consider her a liability. Probably, she said honestly. Kesha nodded, slowly. Okay, she said. Okay, Gianna said. Okay, Kesha repeated, with the specific firmness of a woman who has made a decision and is not interested in being talked out of it. Because you're not doing it alone. Whatever it is, whatever comes. She held up one hand before Gianna could speak. Don't argue with me about this. I hit a light switch in total darkness at midnight based on nothing but your word. I'm not backing out now because things got complicated. Gianna looked at her. She felt something move through her chest, the same shift she had felt earlier in the night, the one she had controlled, the one she had filed away for later. This time, she let it move. Thank you, she said quietly. Kesha looked at her for a moment. Then she said, Don't thank me. Buy me coffee, the good kind. Not whatever that is, she added, gesturing at the overnight pot on the break room counter, which had been sitting since 11 p.m. and had achieved a consistency that was closer to tar than beverage. Gianna almost laughed. She didn't quite, but it was close enough that it counted. 4 a.m. and 22 minutes. Holt called at 4:30 to confirm that Darnell had been moved to a secure federal medical facility. He didn't give the location, which she didn't expect. He told her that Marco had made contact, as she had predicted, and that the name and timeline had been corroborated by a second source within the hour. The next 48 hours were going to be active on the federal side, and he was asking her to stay accessible. She told him she would be. He thanked her with the directness of a man who did not overthink people, but meant it when he did. Before he hung up, he said, The names Caulfield gave us, I can tell you they're going to reshape the scope of the investigation significantly. This goes into infrastructure, legal, governmental, things that are going to take time to unpack. He paused. What Darnell started when he got into that ambulance tonight, he may have cracked something open that needed cracking open a long time ago. He called it himself, she said. The ambulance. He called it himself. I know, Holt said. That matters. She hung up and sat with that for a moment. Darnell Watkins, who had helped plan the operation that nearly destroyed this hospital tonight, who had compiled a file on her and used her identity as a bargaining chip in a game she hadn't known she was in, who had also, at the last possible moment, before the last possible door closed, made a different choice. A costly choice. The kind that couldn't undo what came before it, but that changed the direction of everything that came after. She understood that better than most people. The cost of a different choice made late. The way it didn't erase the damage, but it did, if you meant it, means something real. 4 a.m. in 51 minutes. Final twist. At 4:51 a.m., a new admit came in through the ambulance bay. Routine. A man in his mid-50s with chest pain radiating to the left arm. Diaphoretic, the classic presentation. She was at the bay to receive him before the paramedics had finished giving their report, and the work took over the way it always did. Complete and immediate, every other thing moving to the periphery where it belonged, while the essential thing occupied the center. They got him stabilized. Dr. Okafor, who had returned from a 2-hour mandatory rest break, looking only slightly less exhausted than when he left, came in and took over with the smooth, practiced authority of a man who could perform this in his sleep, and sometimes did. When they had him stabilized and transferred to a monitored bed, Okafor looked at Gianna across the patient and said, quietly, How are you doing? Honestly. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I'm still standing, she said. He looked at her. The bruise, the hand, the eyes that had seen too much in the last 5 hours, and were still, somehow, entirely present. You know, he said, in 22 years of emergency medicine, I have never once seen anything like what happened in this building tonight. I hope you never do again, she said. That is a sentiment I share with every cell in my body, he said. He paused. You saved everyone in here tonight, Gianna. Every single person. He said it the way he would have given a definitive diagnosis, plainly, without ornament, because plain truth needed no dressing. She looked at the man in the bed, whose chest was rising and falling in the steady, medicated rhythm of someone whose crisis had been caught in time. She thought about all the people in all the rooms and all the corridors of this building. She thought about Earl, asleep in a consultation room chair, who had needed none of it. She thought about Kesha hitting that light switch. "We saved everyone," she said. "All of us." Okafor looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded once, with the particular gravity of a man who knows when something has been said correctly and doesn't need to add to it. He turned back to his chart. 5 a.m. in 33 minutes. The shift change happened at 7, and by 5:30 the overnight staff had begun doing the things overnight staff does in the last hours before the day crew arrives. The handoff notes, the chart completions, the quiet restoration of order to a floor that had been anything but orderly for the last 6 hours. There was a particular rhythm to it, familiar and grounding, and Gianna moved through it with the same focus she brought to every task, because the rhythm itself was part of the point. At 6 a.m. she went to the break room. She made fresh coffee, actual fresh coffee, dark roast the way Kesha liked it, and she poured 2 cups and she brought one down the hall to where Kesha was finishing her last set of notes, and she set it on the counter without saying anything. Kesha picked it up, took a sip, looked at Gianna with an expression that was tired and warm and complicated in all the ways that 4 years of knowing someone in difficult circumstances makes a relationship complicated. "Good coffee," Kesha said. "I know how you take it," Gianna said. "You know everything," Kesha said, not critically, just as a fact. "Not everything," Gianna said. "Enough." They stood together at the nurse's station in the last hour of the night shift and drank their coffee, and the ER moved around them in its ordinary rhythms, and outside the windows the sky over Memphis was beginning its slow transformation from the deep gray of pre-dawn to the first hesitant light of morning. The city going about its business, the night becoming something else. 6 a.m. and 47 minutes. She was at her locker when her phone buzzed one more time. Not Holt. Not an unknown number. It was from a number she recognized, a number she had not seen in 3 years, not since she left the service, a number she had kept in her phone without knowing why, the way you keep certain things because deleting them would mean making a definitive statement about who you are now and who you are no longer, and some days you're not ready to make that statement. The text was 4 words: "We need to talk." She looked at it for a long time. She looked at the name attached to the number. She looked at the locker door in front of her and the scrubs on the hook inside it and the hospital ID badge with her photo and her name and her title. Nurse. Gianna Ricci, night shift, hanging on its lanyard. She thought about what Holt had said. The world had walked into her ER tonight. She thought about Marco in the corridor saying, "You left." She thought about the text she was looking at now. 3 years of silence from a number she had kept, because deleting it would have been a statement. The world did not stay in the past simply because you left it there. But she also thought about Diane's blood pressure coming down. She thought about Gerald holding his wife's hand. She thought about Marcus and his mother's medical bills and the terrible arithmetic of desperation. She thought about Darnell in the back of an ambulance, making the call himself. She thought about the fact that everyone in this building was going home today. She put the phone in her bag. She closed the locker. She put on her jacket. She walked out of the locker room, down the corridor, through the ER floor, past the beds and the monitors, and the quiet, essential machinery of a place that existed for one reason only, and through the main entrance doors into the early morning air of Memphis, Tennessee. It was 6:53 a.m. The sky was fully light now, the kind of pale, uncomplicated blue that belongs specifically to early morning before the heat arrives, before the day has staked its full claim on the hours. She stood outside the entrance for a moment and breathed it in. She could smell coffee from somewhere nearby, and exhaust from the street, and the particular combination of antiseptic and fresh air that clings to hospital workers the way salt clings to people who work near the ocean. She thought about the text on her phone. she would answer it. Not today, maybe not for several days, but she would answer it because she was not someone who pretended that things weren't happening when they were happening. And something was happening now that she was going to have to navigate with all of the tools she had. Both of them, all of herself. She had been a healer and a warrior for a long time. The mistakes she had made, the mistakes she saw clearly now, in the early morning light, after the longest night of her 3 years in Memphis, was in believing those were two separate things that needed to be kept in separate compartments. That the person who fought in the dark and the person who held a frightened woman's hand and said, "Your name is Diane, you're in good hands," were different people who happened to share a body. They were not different people. They were the same person who had walked into Memphis Regional Medical Center 3 years ago and had quietly and without announcement become indispensable. Not because she was the most credentialed, not because she had the most impressive file, but because she was fully present in every moment, and she never, under any circumstances, stopped caring about the outcome. That was who she was. All of it, together, at the same time, without apology. Her phone buzzed one last time. A text from Kesha. "Left your coffee on the nurse's station. You forgot it. Also, you better be back tomorrow. Don't make me break in a new partner." Gianna looked at the text. She looked at the sky. She looked at the entrance doors of Memphis Regional behind her. The same doors that had cracked at the hinges when Marcos shoved them open 8 hours ago. Now standing repaired and quiet in the morning light, doing what they always did, opening for whoever needed to come through. She typed back, "I'll be back tomorrow." She meant it completely. She always did. Some people were made for exactly one thing. Gianna Ritchie was made for two. And the night she had just survived had proven, beyond any doubt, that in her hands, those two things together were the most powerful combination in any room she would ever walk into. She put her phone in her pocket. She started walking toward her car. Behind her, Memphis Regional kept its doors open for whoever came next. And inside it, on the night shift nurse's station, a cup of good coffee sat cooling in the early morning quiet, waiting for her to come back. She would. She always came back.